then I will go ahead and get started. I've noticed that there are 57 of you that are currently in the participants folder, but there are only 33 in the Nearpod link. So if you guys wouldn't mind joining the Nearpod, I would appreciate it. Okay, so I will go ahead and get started. I just want to say welcome back. I hope you guys had an enjoyable lunch. I hope you had a chance to get away from your screens for a while and go do the things that you needed to do to help so that we're motivated for this afternoon. I will be talking to you guys about the English language arts. My name is Jamie Robinson, and I am the preschool through second grade specialist at USBE. Had 19 years of teaching in public school, but I had a lot of years in preschool and kindergarten in particular. So that's kind of my background. And then I would like to take a second. Jessica worked really hard during our break. We're going to have random breakout rooms for a majority of today. And then you will have your specific groups or schools for the training or for the planning this afternoon. But I want you guys to take a second and introduce yourselves to I'll give you 3 minutes to introduce yourselves to your breakout room. Talk to them kind of about where you're from and your background, how many years of experience you have in early education. And then also if you wouldn't mind telling them your favorite storybook to share with students. So I'm just expanding my screen so I can see as many of you as possible at the same time. So today we kind of already done the introductions, but we're going to start with like a brief review and an activity. Then we'll talk about the science of reading and a lot of the research that I found. We'll take some time to go into depth about the English language arts standards. We'll talk about a new literacy block that is in a draft mode right now, but something that I would like you guys to all consider. And then we'll talk again about the professional learning standards. And then you will have hopefully 30 full minutes to create a professional development framework that you'll take back and teach to the teachers in your program. So you guys had a moment this morning to work with collaboration boards, but I want you to think about in either the lifelong learning practices or the health education, what practice did you see or hear about where a teacher implemented the new standards that you were particularly proud of? Okay, there are some great things on there, and I love that we're taking into effect the social and emotional and personal care routines that we discussed at the beginning of the year. So thank you guys for taking time to do that. And then the next one is a poll. And this is just for us. We want to make sure that our trainings are effective, but I want you guys to be honest. You're not going to be in trouble. But if you will let us know how many of you have been able to actually hold professional development for lifelong learning practices in health education, that would be greatly appreciated. So we still have some answers coming in, but I wanted to give you guys kind of like the idea that our hope is that as we teach each content area, that during that time before the next training, you have some time to work with your teachers and do some training with them on those content areas that were discussed. So we may not have been as explicit or as clear with kind of what our vision was. So I just wanted to kind of maybe touch on that again. And we also understand it's a crazy time. It's a crazy year. And we also understand that there are things that are not allowing you to do so. So like I said, please know that we're not shaming or judging or anything in that manner. So just wanted to give you guys something to think about. I was just catching up on some of the chats, you guys. Thank you for filling that in. So kind of as a review, I wanted to let you know or talk a little bit and remind you of executive functioning. And when you're considering executive functioning, you have to remember that it's interconnected and correlated component skills. So it includes the cognitive flexibility, plus the working memory and the inhibitory control. So when we were talking about executive functioning, and Jared talked about that with the lifelong learning practices, I wanted to remind you what those are before we start the next activity. The next activity will be something that's going to test your executive functioning ability in reading. So this is the Stroop test, and you guys will notice there's a link at the bottom of the page. If you guys will click on that link, your instructions are, you need to name the colors of the following words. Do not read the words, rather just say the colors of the words. There are two parts. So if you'll do test 1 and test 2, and I'll give you 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and reflect on the experience and then ask for any share outs. Is there somebody that would like to share their experience with us?
I'll share it. Because I was laughing while I was doing it because I had to say it out loud. Like I couldn't say it in my head. And it took a lot longer to say than if you could just read the word instead of observing the color separately. It was interesting.
Got 2 more volunteers?
I can. I just noticed as I was going, it took forever to like actually focus on what the color was. I just wanted to keep reading the word. But I noticed when one time pink was in red, and that one came to me really quick, like it was still close enough that I could go there. But if it was like a yellow in the word blue, it took me forever for my brain to bring that back up.
Okay, and one more.
I noticed that by the last row, I was really making a lot more errors than I was on the first couple of rows. I think my brain got tired in that short amount of time.
So it kind of takes you back to that. We have to have that cognitive flexibility, that working memory, and the inhibitory control, right? That test, like when you took the first test and they were actually like the same color as the word, like, I don't know about you, but I flew through that part. When it came to the second one, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, a lot more concentration going on here. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of how the executive functioning kind of works throughout the day, and it is included in the ability that we have in order to help our students learn to read. So for today's objectives, I want you to be able to name 2 things that you learned from the research in the science of reading. I want you to understand how to locate the standards as well as strategies and activities, and then have a created implementation plan for the professional development that you're going to provide for your program. And so those are kind of like the main 3 objectives that we're going to have for today. The biggest thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is this whole idea of equity. The tragedy here is that most reading failures are unnecessary. The path to learning how to read, however, requires knowing how print represents sounds, syllables, and meaningful word parts. For most students, developing that body of knowledge requires explicit instruction and practice over several grades. While some students seem to figure out that print system incidentally, most do not. And so what they have found based on the research is not knowing how to read translates into behaviors, anxiety, acting out for many, many students. And it's also the whole equity part comes in, is that it has been referred to as the rich man's game, right? Where you have people that can actually afford the tutoring and that can afford to have their child in a program that can explicitly teach them how to read. Sometimes it's not equitable for all students. And so students living in poverty, students of color, and students who are eligible for remedial services can become confident readers at any age. And so I want you to still know that there is definitely hope. And our biggest thing that I found, like through the research and what I've tried to implement for you guys today, is that I've gone through and I've done the research and I've looked at several workshops, webinars. I've done a lot of article searching into what that research is so that we can more easily or better inform teachers of what it is that actually needs to be taught when it comes to reading for early students. So may I have volunteer number 1, who is Chelsea Oakes. Will you read this for me? You seem to be on mute, Chelsea, or we can't hear you. I can see that you're not muted, but I can't hear you. Try again.
Can you hear me now? Okay, for some reason it switched my mic on me. All right, when children begin school, we cannot predict with sufficient accuracy which children will struggle to learn to read without explicit, systematic phonics instruction and which will not. Therefore, the most ethical and prudent action is to provide all children with the most effective teaching methods based on the best available evidence, thereby accelerating the progress of all children and minimizing the likelihood that any child will struggle to learn to read.
Okay, so that is what I'm hoping to do with some of the research that I share with you guys today. And Ellen, would you mind reading this one?
You bet. Evidence to guide our practices is stronger than it has ever been. Unfortunately, much of the research is not yet included in teacher preparation programs, widely used curricula, or professional development.
Okay. And may I have Tori read this one?
Absolutely. Learning to read is not like learning to speak. It is not innate. We need to be taught that our spoken words relate to a written alphabet.
Okay.
Emily
I just
Hansford.
want to, sorry, Tori, go ahead.
No, I was just reading the name. That's
Okay.
all.
So you guys will notice there is in your shared folder, all this research and most of the information that I've had on here will be in that folder. So you'll be able to access that later, but that kind of drives home that all children will be better readers if they are taught how to read. If we are not teaching phonics and phonemic awareness, you are not giving students an even playing field. Most struggling readers struggle by either not being able to play with and manipulate sounds, not understanding how the alphabet ties to speech sounds, or by not having explicit instruction to the structures of written language. No one is arguing that you need to teach only phonics. However, we have an emphasis, or we have to emphasize why explicitly teaching phonemic awareness and phonics in preschool is a vital component to reading success. So now we're going to go a little bit more into the research. So I found most of this research from, it's called the Center for Early Reading, and it's through Amplify Learning to Read. And so that link is in your resources, but it says each time that you go from a spoken word, you guys can see that it's like building a muscle, and there's a time lapse for spoken words showing the part of the brain that is engaged. Starting from the left, it shows the brain of someone speaking a word. When you say a word, activity starts out in a small spot roughly in the middle of the left side of the brain. In less than a second, it spreads downward and forward until a big chunk of the left side of the brain lights up. So that is what the brain research is saying when you speak words. On this slide, you guys can see that it says the part that is lit up is the part of the brain that deals with speech. Notice that the rear part of the brain is dark and isn't involved in speech at all. And on this slide, it talks about the written word. This is the brain reading a word instead of speaking it. As we've seen, the middle area is responsible for speech. Instead, activity spreads from the brain along the bottom surface and into the whole middle area. This is a slide of the brain reading a word instead of speaking it. This time you will notice the activity starts in the back of the brain or the visual area of the brain. If a student couldn't read, it may light up in that area, but it would end there. It would not continue across. If a person can read, the activity spreads from the back of the brain along the bottom surface and into the middle. That middle area is where we have learned is responsible for speech. So what we are seeing is that when you're reading a written word, it triggers the speech component. So the same circuit is involved. This I also found was very interesting, that the same circuit that's involved in articulating a word or just recognizing a word will still have the same brain activity. So whether you actually articulate it and speak a word once it's in written form, it still activates that part of the brain. And then what you guys will notice on this one is between this, so we talked about, you in the green, you'll see the visual field. And we talked about how that starts in the back of the brain and then it moves forward. And then we talked about how speech kind of starts in the middle, but in between there is this magical circuit and this magical switch in which we have comprehension and meaning. It's called the visual word form area. And so we know that everyone is born with the language part of the brain, the speech and the meaning parts. You learn to speak and to understand spoken language simply by being around other people who speak for a few years. And we know everyone is born with the visual part of the brain, but no one is born with the connection between the vision and the speech. So that's why it needs to be explicitly taught. And this just restates that we need to actually build that visual word form area of the brain, one connection at a time. And just the example is you have to learn that P stands for the sound of pen, or the first sound you hear in pen. So that homemade part of your brain is surprisingly flexible. You can learn how to, and many of you, if you'll, once I read this, it'll kind of click to you, but that's where you can learn, like if you have the first letter and the last letter of a word, but you can still read the sentence. It's because that visual part has been built in your brains. It also allows you to read, like, if every other word is one's uppercase, one's lowercase in that font, it allows you to read in different fonts in cursive. And so it's building that connection one at a time that then makes it so that it's automatic in your brain when you've had years of practice to do so. So I wanted to ask, in this, I'm not going to call on one of the volunteers to read, but do any of you feel comfortable discussing the 3 stages of learning?
I'll give it a shot, Jamie.
Great.
So my guess is that acquisition is when the child or whoever is receiving the new information, just learning about it for the first time. Maintenance would be all the time that you're practicing with it and trying different activities and using it, studying it, whatever. I'm thinking back in high school when you're studying for the test or whatever. But generalization is when you can remember it. So like, again, I'm thinking back to my chemistry test in high school where I'd study with flashcards forever. I'd get the test and now it's gone. So I think if I have this right, you have to, in order to get that generalization, means it'll stick with you and you can call upon it again later. That's my guess.
Sounds great, Michonne. And then I just wanted to remind you guys too that your typical learning progression for students is that first they can do it receptively. So you'll ask them to point to something, then they can tell you in the expressive language, and then they can produce it by either writing or drawing it. So just if you can kind of remember those 3 stages of learning, and that students actually go through all 3 of those in each of these areas as well, from receptive to expressive to production. So that's just a small reminder there. Okay, may I have some volunteers? Michonne, I know you just spoke, but you're the next one on my list. Will you read Phonological Awareness?
You bet. Phonological awareness is playing with sounds. It refers to the specific ability to focus on and manipulate individual sounds or phonemes in spoken words.
Sounds great. And then Wendy, will you read about phonemic awareness?
Phonemic awareness, the big umbrella. It is a broad skill that includes identifying and manipulating units of oral language, parts such as words, syllables, and onset and rhymes.
Perfect. And so also keep in mind that before children can easily sound out or decode words, they must have at least implicit awareness of the speech sounds that are represented by symbolic units. Jennifer, can you read phonics for me?
Yes, phonics, the tie of print to letter sounds, a method of teaching people to read by correlating sounds with letters or groups of letters in an alphabetic writing system.
Okay. And then I was also going to ask For any of you that attended the letters training, when Lucy Hart-Polson came in that we for the PD that we did last year, can you guys remember how many uppercase letters and how many lowercase letters a child should know before they enter kindergarten?
I can remember. 15 uppercase, 15 lowercase.
Yes, Tara put it in the box too. And I noticed that you guys caught the fact, and I even went over this presentation 3 times, but I zoomed past this slide. Thank you for noticing that my definitions are swapped. Okay, so on this one, I want to talk to you guys what's called the simple view of reading. And I know that this research, like it says 1986, but it's been proven time and time and time again. But the simple view of reading just has the concept that students have to be able to decode words, but they also have to be able to have language comprehension before they will get to reading comprehension. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about that more deliberately, I guess. So the goal to reading is to comprehend text and bring meaning to printed language. So as you can see up here, this language comprehension includes knowledge, vocabulary, sentences, connection, and the gist. Sorry, I had a hard time reading that word. But then on the decoding part down here is more the word recognitions, where you play with sounds and letters and words. So the thing to remember is that most students have been exposed to some sort of language comprehension, but very few have been exposed to decoding skills or word recognition skills prior to any schooling experience. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then I want to let you know that we're going to take a little bit of time for you guys to think about like what you're doing in your programs. It'll be your first breakout or your second breakout session since you've had introductions. But be thinking beforehand about that language comprehension part and the word recognition part about what you're doing in your programs. So one thing to remember is that as you saw that language part at the top and the decoding down at the bottom, those work together to what they call or they create is the Scarborough's rope, where when you have the two of them together, the ultimate goal is comprehension. So that's just kind of a visual to help put that together for you guys. So now we're going to take a few minutes to go to the breakout rooms. And I want you guys to generate and think about at least 3 implementation ideas to teach both the language comprehension and the word recognition. And then when we come back to the main session, will you please have someone in your group scribe at least 1 key idea for each of those categories. And so when we get to that collaboration board, you'll see that it'll give you directions on how to do so. Okay, so I just wanted to give you guys a second, well, probably like a little bit of time just to read some of the ideas that are on that collaboration board. And you might want to take some time to figure out, like in your head as you're reading them, is this the decoding skill or is this a language comprehension idea? As you can see, you can scroll down to all of these amazing answers. Okay, I'm going to have some more volunteers than I need in a minute, but Tammy, would you mind reading this quote for me?
Sure. The fact that teachers need better preparation, professional development, and resources to carry out deliberate instruction in reading, spelling, and writing should prompt action rather than criticism. It should highlight the chronic gap between what teachers need and what they have been given. Just about all children can be taught to read and deserve no less from their teachers. Teachers in turn deserve no less than the knowledge, skills, and supportive practice that will enable their teaching to succeed. There is no more important challenge for education to undertake. Louisa Motts.
The thing that really sticks out there for me is that teachers in general want to do what's best for their students, but sometimes they may not have the knowledge or the understanding. And so taking time to actually work on these components as a coach or as a coordinator to talk to your teachers about will make the progress that we need. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about that. And then I don't have any necessarily volunteers. Ashley, would you mind reading this for me?
Sure. The most fundamental responsibility of schools is teaching students to read. Because reading affects all other academic achievement and is associated with social, emotional, economic, and physical health, it has been the most researched aspect of human cognition. Louisa Moats.
Okay. So for those of you that took the early literacy training that we had, that is written by Louisa Moats and Lucy Hart-Polson. And so anybody that has, a lot of the districts are doing a lot of training on letters this year too. So that's why there's a lot of information on her. So right now we're going to take a quiz. We're going to have 2 minutes to take the quiz. And then when we come back, we'll talk about what the research has found. Okay, thank you guys for participating in that quiz. This research was actually taken from a seminar from the University of Utah Reading Clinic with Kathleen Brown and some people that work with her. So this research is saying that it was not the following reasons. It was not IQ, that people surprised, but it is not correlated in the early grades. It will affect later success in development of reading skills, but it necessarily wasn't part of that. Levels of comprehension and vocabulary are needed. The research does promote explicit vocabulary instruction prior to school years, but coming in with a larger vocabulary did not correlate with the reading success at the end of first grade. Oral language is very important, but only ranked 4th. And it's very important to note that it can be broken down into many parts. A leading literacy expert, Tim Shanahan, while looking at the National Education Literacy Panel report in 2008, reported that certain parts of oral language that they examined mattered. So vocabulary in general is a weak predictor of later decoding and comprehension, but more complex aspects of oral language like grammar and definitional vocabulary are very strong predictors of decoding and comprehension. Socioeconomic status didn't have a huge correlation. Gender did not have a huge correlation. Surprisingly also, the amount of time spent reading to a child did not factor into this study, but several people have wondered if you actually looked at the quality of materials that were read to that child, if that may have changed some of those indicators. So the 3 that are left are concepts of print, phonemic awareness, and alphabet knowledge. So the letter naming and initial sound isolation are the 2 best predictive indicators of later literacy learning. So on that note, I want you guys to take a break for the next 10 minutes. We'll see you back at 2:05. And in that time, we'll talk a little bit more. We're going to start working on the standards. So we'll take 10 minutes now and 10 minutes at the end or before your next planning session. I hope you guys enjoyed your break. Now that we've spent some foundational time talking about the research, I now want to move us into the English Language Arts standards. So we've talked about being very cognizant and knowing how to get students or giving them the instruction that they need. And so we need to be very, very aware of what we're going to do. And so it's kind of like going on a road trip without planning ahead. We kind of need to have a plan of how we're going to get from point A to point B. And so our ultimate goal in preschool is to try to help students be as ready for kindergarten as possible by the time they start school. And so our hope is that with the English Language Arts standards, that will help them be more prepared. It's actually all the standards in particular, but this is that section. So many of you will probably already have curriculums. I just want you to be aware that with the new standards, your curriculums may not teach all the components that are in the standards, and that you might want to take some time going back to look at what may be missing from your curriculum or your program that you might need to supplement in order to make sure that those components or those standards are hit throughout the teaching with your teachers. So there, as you guys have seen, Jessica and Shannon showed you kind of the route on the right this morning. where you can go to uen.org/core and you can access the standards there. You can also go to our USBE preschool site and it will have the standards on there. And then the other avenue is through the UEN preschool page. And so in a second, I'm going to give you 10 minutes and you're going to go through both the standards and the strategies and activities. And you'll have 10 minutes to do that. And then we'll come back and I want you guys to take some time to think about what you found or what you enjoyed while you were there. So like I said on here, it just kind of shows you what you'll see when you get to this page. But this link right here will take you directly to that. So we're going to have 10 minutes of self-exploration. So there are some great ideas in that collaboration board if you want to take a second to look at that. But if there's anybody else that wants to talk about what they found when they were looking through the standards and activities or the strategies and activities and or standards, that would be greatly appreciated. And then Tara, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to call on you in a minute when we talk about color coding for 4-year-olds. You'll notice there's a slide, so you'll know you're coming up.
Jamie, you need to reshare.
Oh, thank you. I think I will remember that, but no. Okay, Leanne, will you please read what's underneath the ELA strand, academic and social language?
Language development is crucial in the preschool years to establish foundational skills for all future academic and social success. Language skills include the ability to speak as well as listen.
Okay, and Tori, will you read reading?
Sure. Reading. Did I unmute? I didn't last time. Reading. By exposing children to a wide variety of texts surrounding them with a print-rich environment, they begin to develop foundational reading skills. These skills are divided into 5 substrands: concepts of print, phonological awareness, word recognition, recall information, and comprehension.
Perfect. And Ellen, would you mind reading about writing?
You bet. Writing refers to how children represent spoken words with written language. The development of fine motor control in early childhood is essential for early writing skills. Fine motor skills develop at different rates for each child. Forming legible letters is an emerging expectation for 4-year-olds. Refer to strand 1, fine motor, within the physical education strands for more information.
So if you guys haven't found that in the standard yet, we specifically put in fine motor skills and how to work on them in the physical education. So we did gross motor and fine motor. And then I also wanted you guys to realize that underneath we have the academic and social language, which is speaking and listening. And then this just shows you how it breaks up into those substrands under reading. It's only reading and lifelong learning practices that have the substrands. So I just wanted to kind of refer that or draw that to your attention. And then again, it just referred to the PE section under fine motor on page 71. And then you'll notice down here, I have the pages where you'll find those ELA standards, like if you have the books or you have the link to get to them. And then I wanted you guys to take the next probably 3 minutes and look specifically at these skills underneath each one, because these go back to those 3 indicators that we talked about from the research from the University of Utah. So it lets you know that the writing committee was very intentional in trying to make sure that we hit those components in our standards as well. So I'm going to give you the next 3 minutes to look at that information. Okay, Tara, will you talk to them a little bit more about this page?
Sure. When we were in the writing committee, we were working on the activities section, and we thought that by adding some color coding, it would help to identify new strategies that weren't necessarily in the other strategies to support the standards. Is that what you mean, Jamie? I'm not quite sure what you want me to speak to.
And then just also the developmentally appropriate, more so for 4-year-olds.
Okay.
And so that's why you only stayed in the 4, yeah.
I don't know.
You guys, when we were writing these, she was in a group with Linda Chadburn and Jennifer Salazar, and there were some other people that were in there. But they said, we really want a way that when we're working with our teachers and we're training our teachers, that they can look at and see that a lot of those activities for 3-year-olds are also still very developmentally appropriate for 4-year-olds. But if there's a skill that's a little bit higher that you should expect from your 4-year-olds, we want to be able to color code that.
Okay,
or
yes, that's
somehow.
right. That's
Hey,
right.
Tara, I remember what you said.
I don't know. I'm like, was it because we took activities from the other area and put it in, and then I couldn't remember? Yes.
Well, it's
Thanks.
only been since like March since we've had these kind of conversations. So I just wanted to let you guys know, because we've had it brought to our attention that the way that it's defined in the standards and activities books, some people didn't quite get that that was the concept we were trying to get at. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that we had that discussion here, so you guys knew that what was in the shaded area is more developmentally appropriate for a 4-year-old instead of a 3-year-old. So the other thing that I wanted to kind of mention to you, we had some experts come in and talk to us about dyslexia, and they wanted us to address some certain things to look for in the English language arts section. And I let them know that during the trainings that we had, I would bring this up. So there are some indicators specifically for dyslexia, and it could include a family history, phonological awareness difficulties, and rapid automatized naming issues at the top of the dyslexia red flag list. I also, in your resources, have added the Utah Dyslexia Handbook, in which you can find a more comprehensive list of those red flags. So if we remember that if we intervene early with effective, scientifically validated intervention, the hope is that students with dyslexia will have their reading issues mitigated. And so that's something that I wanted to make you guys aware of as well. In the preschool space, it's developmentally appropriate to have students actively identifying, blending, segmenting, and deleting units of sound. Preschool students may do this at the word level with sentences and compound words, at the syllable level with 2 and 3 syllable words that are not compound words, and at the onset and rhyme. So since this is an awareness and not a skill, we're not drilling these concepts, but we're checking to see if students have the awareness. And then you'll notice in the resources, I have included a screening from Dr. David Kilpatrick. And there's also a book that is referenced there called Book Smart: How to Develop and Support Successful and Motivated Readers. So the best way to teach the alphabetic principle is from speech to print. So the sound or the phoneme is introduced before the letter or the grapheme. And then also remember that adding any type of visuals, which I saw in that collaboration board, a lot of you talked about AAC ideas, but also adding visuals is a great way for students, especially with English language learning problems, to help get some, and I shouldn't say problems, but our English language learners, to help them build that comprehension.
Hey,
So
Jamie.
now we're gonna, go ahead.
Oh, this is Linda. I was just wondering if I could throw in a quick little thing about the rapid automatic naming, because in the feedback, it came back, people were saying that is developmentally inappropriate. And if you're doing it with letters and sight words for 3-year-olds and young 4-year-olds that don't have that yet, absolutely developmentally inappropriate. But you can start that kind of a skill with just like pictures or objects and having them quickly naming, you know, dog, cat, rat, pig, to start getting their brains trained for those automatic recognitions. And it can be just a fun game way to do that and start developing that skill without running flashcards of letters and sight words. So I just wanted to throw that in there in case people were wondering about that.
Linda, I appreciate that. And it's also a great way to work on patterning. And so to have students like look on that patterning part, like we have red, blue, blue, red, blue, blue, and that's that automatic naming part of it too. That's another fun way to introduce that through play and that skill and develop that skill. So Linda, thank you for adding that. So the literacy block is something that in our kindergarten space, they created a half-day model of how many minutes should be spent in each area. And then they also had a full day of like how many minutes should be spent. So Jessica and I worked with Lucy Hart-Polson to come up with this draft of a literacy block for this preschool space. Because a lot of people have asked me, like, how much time should we be spending on literacy comprehension or written expression? Or so there's different components here. So this is kind of the draft of what we have come up with. The important thing that we want to get out there to everyone is that these times are guidelines and they're meant to be taught throughout the day. In no means are we saying you need to schedule 20 minutes of your schedule only to work on listening comprehension. We're saying these skills can be built throughout the day through several different activities. So listening skills like who's going to line up first, who gets to be the snack person, who, you know, like just listening skills that you can work on. And then you'll notice at the very center, we have language, and there are no time guidelines on language because as early intervention people, right, and teachers that work with students, we understand that at the foundation that students will not be able to read if they don't have the language, right? So that's why language is such a huge component in everything that we do in early childhood. And so what I would like you guys to do is I'm going to give you 10 minutes in a breakout room. In that 10 minutes, I've also created, there will be a web browser that you can click on. There's a form where you can, I want you to take time in your group and then put it into that file as to what parts of your day you can do listening comprehension, written comprehension, phonological awareness, and the alphabetic principle and or language. So we're going to give you some time to do that. Are there any questions before we go to the breakout room? Okay, I hope that activity was beneficial for you guys and that gives you an opportunity to, when you're talking to your teachers about using this literacy block, it's across the whole entire day. It's not just meant to be, you know, like it's not high school where you have a 20-minute period for, I shouldn't ever say 20 minutes in high school. It's more like a 90-minute period to teach history, right? So like Jessica and Shannon did earlier today, I was planning on giving you about 10 more minutes to go through the professional learning standards, but I am going to leave the Nearpod up. So if you guys want some more time to go through that, you can. I just really want to make sure we're very clear on, so the Utah Professional Learning Standards Toolkit is here, but then you'll also notice there's some high leverage practices. Those high leverage practices are what educators should be doing in the classroom in order to get maximum outcome from students. And so those are a couple of things that you may look at and then think about how you're going to implement them. But I wanted to take some time to just talk about what I want you to do while you're planning your professional development for English language arts. In the next 3 minutes, ask if you guys have any questions, because then when we come back from break, you'll be sent to your breakout rooms to work on this with your group. So, Penny, would you mind reading this for me?
I'd love to. While parents, tutors, and the community can contribute the reading success, classroom instruction is the critical factor in preventing reading problems and must be the primary focus.
Okay. And so the next 30 minutes, I want you guys to be able to access the standards, access the strategies and activities, use some of the research that we've discussed today. You will also notice in your resource folder, if you guys, there's a copy of this PowerPoint. So you've got the research that's in there, but also a copy of this PowerPoint if you wanted to use any of that. But I want you to come up with an outline of the PD that you're going to provide for your teachers. And then there's also that planning consideration checklist that is included in that shared folder that is pretty detailed and gives you some ideas to consider while you're working. Like as a coach or as an administrator, you want to make sure you have activities that are engaging. You want to make sure that you can identify the standards and have your teachers identify the standards that they're going to be teaching. You want also to make sure that your objectives are clearly stated for the PD that you're offering and what you want them to learn pretty close to the front of the training. You want to make sure that it's accessible to all learners, that you're looking at the next steps and what extensions or support ideas are going to be there, but think about really what you can do to help support teachers before the training. Like you might be able to give them an assignment of please make sure you read pages 3 through 16 so that when they come in, they're not just getting that fresh, they're not looking at the standards for the first time, but they're aware they've already had a chance to go through that so they can be more prepared when you have the professional development. So think about things you can do to support teachers before the professional development that you hold for them. And then also what are the next steps to help support teachers in their implementation after. So please feel free to use any of those resources that are added. Does anybody have any questions as to what I would like you to do in the next 30 minutes? And Amy, yes, Erin is in 7, I believe. So do you want us to have her come? Well, when we do the breakout rooms, the next ones will be by location. So the groups that you've been working with right now, they won't be the same groups. You will be in, Jessica worked really hard during between the 2 trainings to put you in your pre-assigned room. So you should be together with your teams when we come back.
Okay, thanks. We've just been texting like, oh, this would be good. Let's do this for PD. Let's do this.
Yeah, it's not perfect. So as soon as I open them up, I'll still be working on the back end to get you all together. But a lot of you will already be in your group. So we good to go, Jamie?
Yes, but before we do that,
okay,
you guys take like an 8 to 10 minute break where you just get up, walk around, refresh, get some more water so that when you come back, you're ready to do that training piece. If you guys don't mind taking a 5-minute break, I'll have Jessica put you into breakout room starting at 2:55. So we make sure we have that 5 minutes at the end of the training to answer any outstanding questions you guys may have. So if you guys, thank you very much for all your hard work that you did in the breakout rooms. We hope that you have a great plan going forward for how you're going to implement the English language arts. So right now I'd like you to look at this collaboration page, and I want you to think about everything that you've learned today, all the indicators, the research, all the standards, and then how will that impact the way you coach teachers? Then I also just wanted to double check. Please give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you feel, thumbs up if you agree with the statement, or thumbs down if you don't agree with the statement, or you can kind of do the if you're not quite there. So you can name at least 2 things that you learned from research in the science of reading. You understand how to locate the English language art standards as well as the strategies and activities, and that you have a start or foundation of a created implementation plan for the professional development you're going to provide for your teachers. So as you've noticed in the shared folder, there are resources. Here is a lot of the information that I used to gather that, or a lot of the resources for the information I gathered. And then I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions about the standards or the English language arts section or implementation, you're welcome to email myself, but you can also email Jessica Smith and Jared Lisenby that work in our office. Same conversation or same email address, just their first name last name @schools.utah.gov. We really appreciate all the hard work you've done today. We're also thinking that we may switch the following 2 sessions so that we only have an hour for lunch and we end at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon instead of 3:30. So look for that information to be shared with you, but that is about the only change that we may anticipate at this point. And thank you very, very much for everything and all your participation, and keep up the good work.